Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, or good night, depending on when and where you are. Welcome to another recording of the Festival in a Box 2.0. Delighted to say that we have with us a very good friend of ours at the Lakes Distillery, and that is Dhavall Gandhi, a Whiskymaker extraordinaire. He's going to be talking to us about the Lakes Sherry Cask finish. So I'm going to bring Dhavall in now. Hey, Dhavall, how are you doing?
Hey, Eddie. Good to see you. Doing very well. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. All the better for seeing you. It's been too long.
It's been very long. Can't wait to meet in person once every restrictions are lifted.
I know. Well, I can't wait to see what you've been up to. And you're like the tinker man of whiskey. You're always playing around with stuff, which is great. But anyway, listen, thanks very much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. Obviously, I know you and I've known you for some years now, but not everybody at home may know who you are. So why don't you do a quick intro of yourself and what it is you do at the Lakes?
Yeah, so hello everyone. Welcome to my whiskey studio. My name is Dhavall Gandhi and I'm a whiskey maker at Lakes Distillery. Prior to Lakes, I was a whiskey maker for Macallan, and before that, a brewer with Heineken, and I came from a finance background. So my journey, career journey to whiskey making is very, very different. But here at Lakes, I focus on running the whiskey operations. At the same time, I'm responsible for creating all the products that come out from the Lakes table. And today we'll be talking more about the Lakes one blended whiskey, which is sherry cask finished. And I want to share a little bit more about what's different, how do we do things around here, and also a little bit share updates about the Lakes Distillery.
Fantastic, thanks, Dhavall. Yes, so why don't we get diving straight into the one sherry cask finish, as you said. If you could maybe tell us a bit about the bottling, how it was conceived and how you put it together, and then maybe talk about some of the flavors that we can look out for within the whiskey itself.
Yeah, sure, Eddie. So I think before we kind of dive into the one sherry cask bottling, I think it's important to just kind of give a very brief overview of the Lakes house style and what we do. So Lakes is a single malt whiskey company based in Cumbria in England, and we make sherry-led, wood-forward, and flavor-packed whiskeys. And the reason those three things are quite important here is everything that we do around here is focused on sherry cask, and I'm not just talking about an Oloroso or PX, but a spectrum of different sherry casks. We are wood-forward, and what I mean by that is majority of the flavor that we create or we try to create in our liquids have been created through oak. And that gives you complexity, that gives you a different dimension to play around with. I always jokingly say that there are styles which are distillate-led, and I absolutely love some of the styles out there. This one is more wood-led. Doesn't mean woody, it just means there's a lot of interaction between wood and oak is used to create nuances, complexity, and depth of flavor. So when we had to reformulate, so as some of you might have already tried the one blended whiskey before, and it was a different formulation. So when I came in to Lakes in 2016, I started reformulating the blend and also positioning our blended whiskey portfolio in line with our single malt vision, a single malt strategy. And to do that, I have created a whiskey a blend, which is pretty much Scotch malt and grain whiskeys, and also Lake single malt whiskeys at the very core of it. And the reason we are heavily focused on sherry cask and oak and maturation, what I wanted to do as a whiskey geek first and a whiskey maker second is try to showcase what does a cask bring to the consumer from a liquid perspective. So what I mean by that is, if you look at our entire one portfolio, we have one muscatel, one sherry, we have one port, one orange wine. All those blends are the same blends. So the base is the same. So the blend is formulated, which is identical in all those bottlings, The only difference is the finishing of the oak. So you can clearly see if everything is constant, all parameters are the same, what happens when you just change the oak. So it gives you a sort of an exploration bottling just to see, okay, what does sherry do? Now, if I take the same blend and the same whiskey and put it in oak or, port, or put it in orange wine cask, they will always create all these different nuances to play around with. Now, this one is not just a simple old sherry cask matured. It has a complex blend profile. There are sherry butts, sherry hogsheads, and when I'm talking about sherry, we have Oloroso, we have PX. So all those different casks in American oak, Spanish oak. So there are a lot of variables. There are 6 main variables right here. First is Oloroso PX, hogsheads, butts. Also, you have refill cask, first fill cask, and at the same time, American oak and Spanish oak. Now, all that cask come together to create this very complex blend. So it is more like it tastes like a single malt, but it's actually a blend, and it is heavily, intensely sherry. So on the nose as well, there's a lot of dry fruits coming through, a lot of chocolate, cocoa nibs, vanilla, and it has this dry ginger and orange peel character that I prize from sherry cask whiskies. So that's it is. This is everything is natural color at Lakes, including a single malt of a blended whiskey portfolio, natural color, and it's non-chill filtered, and all the blends are bottled at 46.6%. It allows you to bring better flavor character and for you to experience the full spectrum of flavor that have been created.
I mean, you put your nose in it, and it's unashamedly very sherry, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of a sherry bomb of blends, I would call it.
Yeah,
It is not single. I think what I like about this is because of the complexity of the different cask cues, and there's a blend recipe for this, for the cask recipe, I would call it, and that allows it to kind of bring in certain lighter, sweeter characters at the same time, just enough of those wood spice, dry ginger characters to the fore.
As you'd expect, it's clean as a whistle, no sign of any sulfury notes whatsoever, which can sometimes plague sherry casks.
And then on the palate as well, initially a burst of dried fruit, sultanas, raisins, then slowly it evolves into more spice and wood spice. And you have this polished mahogany oak coming through at the very end as well. And it has this nice, delicate finish, not overly long, not too short, but just a light, easy finish that has all these different characters coming through at the end. And mostly it's just very sweet, dry fruit, more figs and dates. I get a lot of dates in this whiskey.
It's funny because sometimes you find with heavily sherried whiskies, you find a very dry, sometimes sort of pencil shaving type finish, but there's none of that. It's like you say, it maintains that dried fruit and stewed fruit and spices.
Yeah, and I like it to be like that. I think there are styles of sherry which are much more, like you said, on the drier, woodier, spicier style. I like to focus much more on the sweeter side of the things.
Yeah,
and I think that allows you to bring different textures to the fore as well.
And I assume it's a very high malt content in terms of the ratio between malt and grain.
Yeah, there is a higher malt content, and the reason for that is to use and give it a little bit more body to it to hold up to the sherry cask as well, because this is our first fill sherry hogsheads and butt. So if I just use a very lighter style whiskey, it will be overpowered by the wood. And to counteract that, the malt content is different. The whiskey is slightly peated. There's a very light peated Islay in it as well. And most of the whiskeys that are in there are mostly West Coast Scotland. And the grain comes from North British.
Oh, right. Okay, that's interesting. The only distillery still to use corn, right?
Yeah, and also North British. I love North British because of that slightly heavier texture as well. The body is much more heavy than other grain whiskies, and I think that kind of all works together for sherry cask. So it has been designed mostly to allow me to play around with different oaks and casks for maturation. So this is just to showcase. So I think a lot of people confuse the blend, and this is, yes, the blend is created, but blend acts as a canvas here, and the whole point of the blend is to showcase what does the oak bring to the table. So probably the point of conversation is all this different cask rather than the blend. But blend is important as we know it. But that was the whole idea behind this one series.
Brilliant. Well, listen, while we're enjoying that whiskey, would you mind telling the viewers at home a little bit of the history and behind the lake?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lake's Distillery. So we started distilling in December of 2014, and it was founded by our two co-founders, Paul Curry and Nigel Mills. Paul came from the Isle of Arran distilleries. His father and his brother, they all started the Isle of Arran, and he wanted to set up a whiskey distillery in England. And he found this amazing, it's a beautiful, serene location. It was a derelict farm that was completely reconverted into this small distillery. We are on the banks of Lake Bassenthwaite, and we also focus 100% on single malt whiskey. We are a single malt whiskey company. Of course, we have our gin and vodka portfolio, but that is a separate distillation unit. It's distilled at the Lakes Distillery, but it's a separate distillation unit than the single malt. And the single malt is produced 7 days a week. And the style, like I said earlier, is sherry-led, wood-forward, and flavor-packed. So that's the single malt we are trying to make. Now, Lakes Distillery initially started distilling, like I said, in 2014, December. I joined the company from Macallan in 2016, and I was brought in by our then chairman, Dr. Alan Rutherford, who got me here to devise the strategy for the liquid, the brands, look at the stock profile, and create basically a house style. So I started working on the house style since 2016, and then in 2017 is when I actually started working on creating our new make spirit. So our new make spirit has been completely redesigned from the ground up. We call it AR1. AR1 is named after Alan Rutherford, and the Spirit 1 is our light super ester spirit, and it is very light, fruity, very, very estery spirit with long fermentations, clear wort, and then we have two component parts that go in with AR1. One is called AR1 Heavy, which is our meaty, sulfury spirit. And then we have one AR1 peated, which is very gently peated. And I'm talking about 5 ppm peat levels. And all those three go together and create a sub-blend that can be put into different casks to create much more complex, different flavor profile. So that's the work we started in 2017. We ended it early this year. So all the trials are pretty much finished. And everything goes into pretty much 90% first fill sherry and a 10% of everything else, from bourbon to other wine cask to any other exciting cask that I'm working on. But mostly it's first fill sherry. And of course, because we are a new company, the work starts very heavily sherry first fill. But over time, it needs to be balanced out because there will be refill cask that will come into the play as well. And for me, as for any blender, I think refill casks are some of the best to give you both characters. Characters of the oak. At the same time, you can enhance certain characters of the distillate as well. So that's pretty much, in short, the style at Lakes. Now we focus everything from. So this is the studio, and this is where the whole thing starts. I start the whole process from what single malt whiskey I'm trying to create. And you might be aware, Lakes has two single malt whiskey ranges or portfolios. One is called the Whiskymaker's Reserve, you see behind me, Whiskymaker's Reserve is our house style, sherry-led, intense sherry character, but restrained and sweet and elegant at the same time, rather than being a very dry, heavily sherry dram. And then we have a new range called Whiskymaker's Editions. And we recently launched last week Le Goûter, which is a collaboration between Harvey Nichols and Lakes, and it's a limited edition release. So Whiskymaker Reserve, while it focuses on our house style, sherry-led complexity, Whiskymaker Editions are just diversions, fun diversions. It can be anything. It can be sherry, it can be port, it can be wine. But the idea behind that is to do with blending and using different flavor combinations of different oak and blending to create those. And while Whiskymaker Reserve, our house style, is sherry focused, so complexity through sherry cask. And I joke that Whiskymaker Reserve is my car that I use to go to work, and Whiskymaker Editions are my motorcycle I fire up on the weekends. So that's the difference between the two styles.
Excellent. Well, I remember coming to a tasting of yours some years ago when you first released the Whiskymaker's Reserve, and I think you blew the minds of pretty much everyone in that room, including myself, with what you were doing there. So you're saying that now that you've settled on those three, well, the one primary new make and then the two component new makes, are you still doing a bit of tinkering with yeast strains and fermentation times and cut points and so on?
Yeah, so what happened was, Eddie, it's a great question. No, I have pretty much stopped all the tinkering work now, because we did roughly 122 different trials to arrive to this AR1 new make. And for that, we looked at all the different parameters. We looked at changing the mashing from cloudy wort to clear wort. Fermentation time shot up to 96 hours. The distillation that we run is much slower than running it right fast. We also have two different condensers. We have a stainless steel condenser and a copper condenser. So the AR1, our primary spirit, is made in copper condensers, both for wash still and for spirit still. While for AR1 heavy, we use stainless steel condensers. For peated, it's just very gently peated, and it's not you won't see a peated release from Lakes or anything. The peated is there just to add complexity and layer of different flavor profile. And so all the work, all the tinkering from a distillation and new make perspective is pretty much done. We have wrapped up. We have signed off on AR1 earlier this year. So now this is the style that the Lakes will produce going forward for the eternity. And one of the things we did, which was very exciting during the lockdown, even though the visitor center of our distillery was shut, the whiskey operations continue our production, and we also continued our expansion plans. So historically, we are were 130,000 liters of pure alcohol a year, and now we are almost up to 400,000 liters of pure alcohol per year. And that means running our distillery 24 hours 7 days a week. So we have 3 mashes, 3 distillations going on from morning to evening. So we started our full-scale production in September. We just got our wash packs installed and the capability, cooling tower, additional chiller facilities. All those capabilities have been kind of put in place. We're just kind of sorting out a few teething issues. And come September, we will be on full-scale production forever. So that's a very exciting change for the Lakes. Because, Eddie, we had discussed about this earlier as well. Lakes is very much focused on the long term. So we are laying down lots of stock. We don't release as much as we have. We have a lot in the warehouse, but everything has been planned for future. So once the new AR1 comes live, that's where Lakes starts coming out with a much more wider portfolio of different characters. So everything is planned. It's a much more long-term game for us. So we want to take our time, release, what we want right now, and then most of the stuff is laid out for future, including 8 statements.
That's just about what I was going to ask, actually. I mean, obviously, be quite interesting to understand from an innovator like yourself. Do age statements matter? Do they matter to the lakes? Is that something that you guys are interested in? But it sounds like you've half answered that already.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting question. I mean, see, as a blender and as a maker, I love no age statements because, today I've been working on a project right now, and you can see there are some very casks which are quite young, some quite old, some in the middle. But what I can do is I can get more freshness. So the casks right here are some of the sherry casks. I mean, not that young, but old in sense, but it gives you much more fresher, more lively characters, something that I can play around with. It can bring up the whole liquid. While I have some very old ones, and those have much more subdued, mellow character. They are much more restrained, but the fun is in blending. Fun is in taking all these different elements and trying to create something, even more compelling, more interesting. And you will have, you have tasted Whiskymaker's Reserve, and that's pretty much the way I kind of blend it. There's no recipe, 10% that and 90% of, bourbon or sherry. It's completely intuitive, but you have to keep the style and the character and the DNA the same, but you have this room to play around with, pumping up sometimes dry fruits, sometimes focusing on aromatic characters, sometimes going on the floral angle. So you are around to play around with that. So to answer your question, how about the age statement? Age statement probably is important for the business and the consumer as well. It's a good navigator. But what's more important for lakes and myself here is through certain age, I can identify, and there are certain sherry casks which peak at certain age, right? So what I mean by that is, for the sake of argument, cask type A, maybe I'm just saying PX, right? It might peak at 12-year-old, but Oloroso might be peaking at 9-year-old. So I want to create an age statement where the flavor profiles are at the peak, and that's why they play an important role rather than for navigation. Okay, it's a 12-year-old, 16, 21. I don't see age statement from lakes in that way. Lakes age statement would be focused on when does a particular flavor profile kind of kick in. So there are certain port characters. I'm working with some kind of legacy Solera port cask, and they will take much more longer time to peak. So it might be around 16 years. It might go into port, or 21 years or 20 years. It doesn't have to follow a recipe, but that's the age statement I was talking about.
Thank you. This is fascinating listening to you talk about non-age statements, because obviously in certain quarters of the industry, or certainly with certain quarter of consumers, they're seen as something bad or negative, whereas you take it from a completely different point of view, which is a opportunity to really create something that is more than the sum of its parts, and not to discriminate based purely on the age of the whiskey.
Yeah, I think that's a right way to look at it, because, just like you have kids in your household, right? If you have twins and they grow up in the same household, but maybe one might mature probably 2 years earlier than the other one, someone might take time in life as well. I mean, we still figure out things as we grow older, and there are times when there are peak, let's take them out. And if it's not at peak, let it kind of be. You cannot force this thing. I think one of the mistakes I see happening a lot is people trying to force a certain character, force certain oak profile onto the liquid. The distillery will produce what it wants to produce. Okay, you can push it down, but sooner or later it will drift back into the style it wants to create. And as a whiskey maker, probably your obligation to the distillery and to the consumers is to try to highlight those nuances and characters. And that's what we have to do. And that's what I try to do as well. I'm not pushing it into certain style. I'm looking at what style it likes, and I'm trying to highlight it even more by using oak to kind of bring off those characteristics.
Indeed. I wonder, and I hope actually that with regards to the Whiskymaker's Reserves, that once you do get to the point where you are perhaps releasing age statement whiskies, my hope would be is that you continue with the Whiskymakers Reserve, because I think it's such a interesting project.
Yeah, I think it's probably my favorite project, because it allows me to sort of, work around in a construct. There's a scaffolding of a certain flavor and character, and I get this opportunity to play around between them. So that's what I, like with the Whiskymakers. It will always stay, but I think over long term, and like I said, I started with the distillery in 2016. But we had, new makes created before, but then we have this new make now, which is the Lakes 2.0, when we go full scale production. So there will be stock that we'll have to maneuver as a blender and take it to the next step. But, there's fascinating stuff out there, because probably this is the first new make that has been designed to work with the cask rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Fascinating. Now, listen, you've probably already answered the question I was going to ask in terms of what the future holds, because there's so many things that you have planned and are already actioning. But is there anything else that that you can tell us that might be coming down the road?
So I think we discussed the capability part. So we did the expansion phase, and we added 8 new wash packs. We have added other distillation capability. We have also built 4 new warehouses. We are in the process of building more. So because it's okay to start a distillery, but when you want to plan your stocks for long term, you have to build a lot of capability in the warehousing and maturation side of things to store all those casks. So we are kind of focusing on that. From a product perspective, we have some exciting new releases coming up as well from the Whiskymakers Editions range, and they are all different. That's what I can share. Some are focused on blending, some are focused on certain emotions, some are focused on sherry cask. So this fun spectrum of bottlings coming out this year. And of course, the Whiskymaker Reserve is always planned, so you'll always have that bottling coming through. But the Whiskymaker Edition is where I have focused a lot of time recently to create all these different variants. And I think I'm very excited about what's in store for the consumers.
Yeah, well, Whiskymakers is obviously all 4 editions so far have been the highest quality, and I'm sure you feel no pressure whatsoever to ensure that the quality continues. When can we expect Whiskymakers 5?
I think I haven't decided yet, and I think you said something there. I mean, for me, it's ready when it's ready. Not when a market or supplier or somebody. We respect everybody, but the liquid needs its time, and I think that's one thing. Fortunate to have a very team. We all kind of buy into that philosophy that it's ready when it's ready. So no pressure again. It will be coming up, but there's no defined date yet. I'm still working on it. Actually, I was just kind of. The one you see behind right here is Whiskymakers Reserve number 5. So I'll be kind of working on that at the moment. It's already finished. I'm just putting some final tweaks to it, adjustments, some cask here, and one more cask there. It's still work in progress.
Well, I'm sure everyone will look forward to that. Just finally, Dhavall, if you wouldn't mind, from a personal point of view, what's your current feelings on the global whiskey industry? And is there anything exciting or even concerning that you'd like to comment on?
No, I think it's all positive. I think it's a fascinating time in the whiskey industry, and especially the world whiskey. The amount of new variants, new styles coming out, and people are making some amazing whiskeys around the world. So I think that's what I find more exciting. I think it is getting more like where wine was, where suddenly, you had a few producers, and then suddenly all these small producers from different vineyards come together with their own different style, with their own different interpretations. And they're creating some amazing liquids. So I think that's, for me, is the most fascinating part about it. And I think the other thing is, the good news is, hope everybody's vaccinated soon, and we return back to normal, because I think one thing I miss most about our industry is, that meeting people and catching up and sharing of ideas and thoughts, and those whiskey shows, those bring energy. I always say that those are the months, those September, October months of the shows and meeting people is your battery charging period. You charge your batteries there, and then you come back to your whiskey labs and studios and distilleries and focus on creating all those products, and you back again. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, amen to that. Yes, it would be wonderful when we can finally meet again and share a beer and a dram and everything else in between. Anyway, listen, Dhavall, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to see you and speak again. Sorry it's been so long, but it's just the way of the world at the moment, right?
No problem. And thank you for having me. And on behalf of Lakes and myself, thank you for having Lakes in this part of this program as well. Thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure. And hopefully the next time we see each other, it will be in real life in a real festival. How about that?
Absolutely. Take care. Stay safe, and I'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dhavall. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, Eddie.